Wise Child by Monica Furlong, Chapter 5, Cormac. You worked very hard yesterday, Juniper said as I sat down to breakfast. I felt pleased, but I didn't want her to know it. I was punishing her for leaving me yesterday. Presently she went out to feed the hens. I began to sweep the floor with the hazel broom. She came back with a full pitcher of milk and a cheese in her hands. She looked distressed. The fairies didn't take their food, I said in surprise. Perhaps I was a bit late putting it out. It was not until lunchtime that I mentioned the leper. That horrible Cormac was shambling around here. I soon scared him off. Juniper stared at me with such astonishment that I stared back. You did what? I threw a stone at him, I said virtuously. I knew you wouldn't want him stealing eggs or staring through the window. The village women had always said that he stole eggs. A look of pain passed across Juniper's cheerful, sunburned face. I must go and see him, she said suddenly. What? I must go and see him. I have been caring for Cormac, for his face, and giving him food for, several years. Only yesterday I brought back some herbs that I thought might help him. Whom do you think I put the food out for every night? For Cormac! Of course. But he's horrible! All the children throw stones at him. Philin says that he did something very wicked and he's been punished by getting leprosy. Did you know that he was Philin's brother? No, honestly, but it gives me the shivers. He's disgusting. He's sick and very lonely. Perhaps because I was so surprised at Juniper's reaction, I could feel my face setting into its most obstinate expression. Well, I don't care. I don't want him around here. That's a pity, because we are going to see him. When? Now. Even as she spoke, Juniper was moving briskly around the place. She put 2 baskets on the table. Into one of them she put a big bag of oatmeal, some comfrey, and a small linen bag I had never seen before, presumably the special herbs she had brought back with her. Into the other basket she put bread, cheese, oatcakes, milk, and preserves, and covered it all with a clean cloth. I'm not coming. I need you to help me carry the baskets. Tilly can carry them. Tilly is not coming. Besides, I want you to come with me. I don't want to come. Fetch the hairbrush, said Juniper inexorably. I began to brush my hair. You could put on a clean smock, too. For a leper? I asked incredulously. Of course. You can see what he can see what you look like, can't he? Juniper herself changed into a pretty blue dress and put on her new straw hat, not the one with the unravelled bits around the brim. I shall wait outside, I said, as we began to walk along the track. I shan't come in. Where does he live, anyway? He has a hut out in the meadow. It was then that I guessed Juniper must have given him the hut, or at least let him build it, since I knew that most of that land belonged to her. It had not occurred to me before to wonder where Cormac lived once they had turned him out of the village, nor how he could eat when he was always mocked or driven away. I don't understand, I said crossly. Juniper did not offer to explain anything. She seemed pretty cross herself. The sun was warm, Juniper was walking extremely fast, and soon I was sweating with the weight of the basket. Is it much farther? I grumbled. Juniper didn't answer. I shifted the basket from one arm to the other. The flies were buzzing around my hot face. After what seemed a long, long walk, I could see a small cabin in the distance, above the waving blue grass and poppies. As we got nearer, I could see a tiny garden outside it, with a well. No smoke, said Juniper as if to herself, and it was true. There was no sign of a fire or that the cabin was occupied. You wait here, Juniper said, when we got to the edge of his little garden. Hadn't I already told her that I had no intention of going inside a leper's house? I sat down by the well and was just going to pull up the cup and give myself a drink of water than I remembered whose lips must have drunk out of that cup, and I let the chain go with a shudder. Juniper walked through the open door of the house, bearing both the baskets. There was no sound. I expected to hear conversation, or that Juniper would come out and tell me that Cormac was away somewhere. But there was silence. It was most odd. I sat there by the well for a quarter of an hour or so, and then curiosity got the better of me. I walked to the door of the cabin, put my head around it, and there sat Juniper and Cormac. Cormac was sitting upright on a straw pallet on the floor facing the wall. Somehow I knew he had been weeping. Juniper was sitting on the only chair in the room, facing the same direction as Cormac, and I knew she had not spoken. She was waiting. I looked around the room, which was simple and orderly. There was the hearth with the smoke hole in the roof, but it was obvious that the ashes were cold and dead, and that Cormac had not cooked there recently. Most of the light came through the door and through one opening on the same wall. The earth floor was covered with rushes and herbs that had a sweet smell. There was a wooden chest, one or two books, a shelf that held jars of beans, seeds, nuts. There were some plants, a cup and cooking pots, a crock that perhaps held bread. Neither Cormac nor Juniper moved or spoke. And having looked around the room, I crouched down on the floor just inside the door and wondered what to do next. The silence was thick, and within the silence I could feel Juniper waiting for something, though I could not imagine what. I sighed rather loudly, but Juniper did not turn my way nor show any sign of having heard me. It struck me that Cormac, at least seen from the back, did not look as bad as I had thought. Sitting there on his bed, quite still, not running away, he looked dignified. All at once I surprised myself with the sound of my own voice. "I am sorry I threw a stone at you," I said. "I expect I was frightened." There was another long silence. "It was a silly thing to do, and I'm sorry you did not take the food. I did not realize it was for you." There was still silence in the room, though it felt a warmer silence. Juniper still waited. Cormac still faced the wall. "I'll go outside now," I said. "I don't blame you if you hate me." I went outside and sat by the well, trying to think what had happened. I had been so sure I was right to hate Cormac. Hadn't Furlong said that it wouldn't have happened to him if he had not led a wicked life, and that wicked people ought to be punished? After a few minutes I could hear voices softly talking inside. I even thought I heard Juniper laugh very gently. The voices rose and fell for a bit. And then Juniper came to the door and said, "Wise child, do you think you could find us some firewood?" Which I did. Soon the smoke was coming out of Cormac's smoke hole again, and Juniper must have been making a poultice with the oatmeal, because as I crept closer to the door again I could hear her saying, "I hope it's not too hot, but the hotter the better, really." I peeped in, and Juniper was applying the cloth to Cormac's poor face, and Cormac gave only a slight grunt as he felt the heat. "That's good," said Juniper. Later on, quite a bit later, she came out to me in the garden and took me by the hand, saying, Cormac would like to speak to you." I had dreaded having to look Cormac in the face, but since she had me by the hand, and I seemed to have caused so much trouble already, I did not know what else I could do but obey. She led me into the hut, and there was Cormac, sitting on the chair facing the door. I looked and looked again in astonishment. In my mind, as in my nightmares, I had always seen Cormac's two ghastly bloodshot eyes, in a yellow tattered face, horribly alive, the surface of his skin crawling. I do not know whether it was because Cormac had begun to become real for me, or because of the fearfulness and infinite tenderness with which I had seen Juniper touch the living wound. But there was nothing there that frightened me now. Just two sad dark eyes. One whole cheek, most of a nose, and another cheek raw and whitened and pitted with holes. I looked carefully. There seemed nothing else to do. "It's not as bad as I thought," I blurted out. A ghost of a smile seemed to cross Cormac's features. "I'm glad," he said in his poor thickened speech. "Perhaps I won't scare you so much." "I am no longer scared of you, sir," I said, and I meant it. I kept searching for whatever it was that had frightened me before. Juniper and I walked silently home. After supper, a silent supper, when we had washed the dishes, we sat in our chairs without stories or singing. "Are you angry with me?" I asked at last. Without speaking, Juniper held out her arms, and I climbed into her comfortable blue lap and leaned against her. "I didn't know he was like that," I said at last. Furlong said he had committed a terrible sin, and that was how God had punished him." "Furlong may hate Cormac, but I don't think God does," said Juniper. "Your God loves people, doesn't he? Jesus healed the lepers, and he forgave people who did wrong, even the ones who crucified him. Isn't that right? So why would he give Cormac, dear good Cormac, such dreadful punishment? What could he possibly have done that was bad enough?" "Furlong didn't say. I suppose he could have killed somebody," I said speculatively, "or done something wicked with his body, like, you know." "Lots of people kill other people without getting leprosy," said Juniper. as well as hurting them in all sorts of other ways. Of course, it does sometimes make them ill in their minds, and their minds sometimes make their bodies ill, but usually we don't know why people are ill. What about your medicine? Will it make Cormac well? Like the cuts on Cormac's legs? I don't know. It's more difficult. Maybe Finn's hatred makes it harder to get well. Maybe my medicine is not strong enough. But I expect it is. There was a long, easy silence between us. You know, I said at last, I thought the plants were just boring and silly, fussing about with leaves and roots and seeds. I didn't think they could really change anything now. It makes it worth the effort. Juniper laughed. Ha ha ha! They're part of the energy, the pattern. You'll see one day. As if the conversation had started the train of thought, I said, I saw Finbar yesterday, in my mind, you know. Yes? I told him to come back. He acted surprised, as if he had forgotten, and had to be reminded. Said Juniper. Sounds like Finbar. And that's the end of chapter 5.